we continue living, worship the living God, we go to the book of Romans. Romans chapter 12. If you're using your Bible, you can find page 1127. I'm going to start from verse 9 through 21. Let love be genuine. Abhor what is evil. Hold fast to what is good. Love one another with brotherly affection. Outdo one another in showing honor. Do not be slothful in zeal. Be fervent in spirit. Serve the Lord. Rejoice in hope. Be patient in tribulation. Be constant in prayer. Contribute to the needs of the saints and seek to show hospitality. Bless those who persecute. Bless and do not curse them. Rejoice with those who rejoice. Weep with those who weep. Live in harmony with one another. Do not be haughty, but associate with the lowly. Never be wise in your own sight. Repay no one evil for evil, but give thought to do what's honorable in the sight of all. It's possible, so far as it depends on you, live peaceable with all. Beloved, never avenge yourself, but leave it to the wrath of God. For it is written, vengeance is mine. I will repay, saith the Lord. To the contrary, is your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he is thirsty, give him something to drink. For by so doing you will heap burning coals on his head. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. Amen.
There is a characteristic that is going to distinguish and point out the person who is the true follower of Jesus Christ, and point out who is the true church and the true followers of Jesus Christ. Especially in the days that we live in, it is going to be this characteristic. Those who do not return evil for evil, but actually return good for evil. I'm only going to be able to introduce this. We will revisit and go into further depth on this next week because there is so much in this passage, but I do want to introduce it, and I do want to say this. There is a choice. There is a choice to how I respond as an individual when somebody does me wrong. There is a choice. Now, oftentimes, we don't see that there's a choice because we just react. Somebody does something wrong to us and our mouth flies open and angry words come out, or somebody does something and already in our mind we are gearing up for the what? The revenge or the comeback. There is also a call for us as a church, and really this passage we're going to look at, especially next week, calls us to be able to lean on one another so that we are able to respond as a church, so that we are able to respond as those who are followers of Christ in the right way in a world that is not going to be taking it easy on us, and we are to be those who respond with good even when evil is coming our direction. There is a choice. The choice is to live in defeat, to be overcome by evil, which is a passive word. Evil comes and I'm overcome by it. Or to be overcomers, and it's a decision. It is a decision. The idea of being an overcomer is the idea that I take action. To be overcome by it means that I'm sitting back and just letting it happen, or I'm getting involved in doing the wrong thing. I want to remind you that this is communion. If you want to see the reflection of Him who had evil done to Him over and over again and yet responded with good, we remember that even this morning. Jesus is the one who took on evil. He took on the evil of the reaction of people around Him, and what did He respond with? In kind? No, he responded with good. He took on my evil. He took on my sin. He took on your evil. And he responded by taking on the punishment of evil itself so that he could forgive us and that he could turn us into those who indeed are not good on our own, but the righteousness of Jesus. When we respond this way, what we're really doing is we're reflecting the character of Jesus Christ. Turn to 1 Peter chapter 2. 1 Peter chapter 2. By the way, if you stay on this subject, you're going to find yourself turning over and over again to passages like Romans 12, 1 Peter 3, 4, the book of Philippians. 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 21, he says this. Let me start back, verse 20. What credit is it if when you sin and are beaten for it you endure? But if you do good and you suffer for it you endure, this is a gracious thing in the sight of God. So if you do the right thing and you pay a wrong price, he's saying you've done the right thing and this is gracious in the sight of God. But then notice what it says. For to this you have been called. It's not a mistake. When we suffer evil and we respond with good, we've been called to do that. Because Christ also suffered for you. Christ suffered for you. He suffered wrongly. He suffered unjustly. He suffered our evil, leaving for you an example so that you might follow in his steps. He committed no sin, neither was deceit found in his mouth. When he was reviled, he did not revile in return. When he suffered, he did not threaten, but continued to entrust himself to him who judges justly. What does that say? If you're going to follow in Jesus' steps, you're going to what? You're going to suffer. But if you're also going to follow in Jesus' steps, the way that you respond in suffering is what? You don't return reviling for reviling, you return blessing for reviling. What I'd like to talk about is 4 different possible responses to evil and to when people do things wrongly towards us. These are not categories that are special, but I'm hoping that they will be ways for you and I to understand them. If we go back to the passage in Romans chapter 12, look at the ending verse of Romans chapter 12. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with evil. The only way that you're going to overcome evil is with what? With good. Not by responding in kind, not by responding stronger than it was, but by responding with the exact opposite. What I'd like to suggest to you are there are 2 possible ways that we can be overcome by evil. Actually, the third one is a little in between. We'll discuss that. And then the 4th way is how we actually overcome evil. The first possible way is I'm overcome by evil because I take things into my own hands. I get my own vengeance. The only one who's actually going to do it right is me. I'm going to give some phrases and you finish them, right? I don't get mad, I get... Do you? Revenge is best served. How come you guys know those phrases? Revenge is best served cold. Because the idea is that you wait until they're not expecting it and then right out of the side. Shoo-wee. Boy, they didn't see that one coming. There are whole TV series based on getting revenge and getting it in a way that the other person not only is taken by surprise, but it paralyzes them to the point that they cannot respond. Unfortunately, you know what? They're the popular shows. You see, this response says, I want to be judge, jury, and executioner. But I want to point out that there are some things that God says clearly in this passage that says this is evil. By the way, this response is evil itself. Do not think that you can take revenge and you can remain apart from it. When you and I start on the pathway of revenge, we start on the pathway of evil itself. You may think that you are dealing with evil, but you become evil in that same process. Notice what he says here, chapter 12, verse 19. Beloved, never avenge yourselves. How much room is there in the word never? There is no room in the word never. It doesn't say avenge yourself when it's been the 70th time or the 71st time. It doesn't say that you can avenge yourself when it's been against your family and not just against you. It says what? Say it, please. How much room is in the word never? None. Never avenge yourselves, but leave it to the wrath of God, for it is written, vengeance is mine, I will repay, says the Lord. You know what God says? Revenge is my territory, and when you start taking revenge for yourself, you're treading and trespassing on my territory. And you will suffer the consequences. I want to show you a contrast that is very important. Turn to Ephesians chapter 4. Let me read that passage we just read. Beloved, never avenge yourselves, but leave it to the wrath of God. Leave room, it says in one translation, for the wrath of God. Turn to Ephesians chapter 4, verse 26. Be angry and do not sin. Do not let the sun go down on your anger. You know what that says? There are times when we will be angry and it will even be justified. You know what he says? Don't let it last. Because anger, even righteous anger, and even when we are getting angry for the right reasons, if you let it last too long, it turns what? It turns sour, it turns evil. Notice what happens. And give no opportunity to the devil. You see, when even right anger lasts too long, and we hold on to it, we start making room for who? Look at the contrast between these two passages. You either give room to God to do what needs to be done with vengeance, and you leave the territory in His hands, or the Ephesians passage, you're giving territory in your life to whom? You either give room to God, or you give room to the devil. Do you remember David in back in 1 Samuel chapter 25? Remember Nabal? And he had protected Nabal, and he had turned back David's men, and David got so mad, and actually David was right for getting angry, but David was like, I'm gonna kill this guy, I'm gonna take what was mine. We protected this guy, he's so ungrateful, blah, 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 blah. So David packs up his stuff, gets on a donkey, he takes his troops, he's marching there, and out comes Abigail, and she has provisions for them, and Abigail stops David, and you know what David says? Well, first of all, Abigail says that, my Lord, do not do this evil thing. And David says, I thank God that you came here because you have stopped me from doing evil. David was about to take vengeance into his own hands, and here comes Abigail, stops him in the process. Both he and she admit that if David had done this, even though, quote, he was justified, it would have been evil. And instead, David leaves it in God's hands, and Nabal is dealt with by God. The second category of being overcome by evil is more a passive category where it says, I'm just overwhelmed by evil. This is a person or a group of people who they're unable to respond to evil, but they would if they could. They're overcome, they're overwhelmed, they go into depression, they withdraw. They believe that life has gotten to the place that resistance would be futile. They become casualties of evil. And all they do is try to stay out of the crosshairs of evil. You know, there are a lot of the politically correct things in our society come from this position. People who are just afraid of all the evil out there, and so they'll just cower and let evil have its day, let evil take away people that it shouldn't, because they don't want to get into the crosshairs. I sat across from somebody the other day, and we were talking about God, and they were talking about how God should be all love, and that that we should respect everybody's lifestyle and everything like that. And I said, look, I respect people, I love them, but if the Bible disagrees with homosexuality, I am not going to say that it's okay. And I could sit here and be quiet and not tell you about this, but I'd be wrong. I will not sit silent when I have the opportunity and the right opportunity to tell somebody what God says. I am not going to sit silent when we have the opportunity to have a dialogue and be respectful and yet tell them the truth. To sit silent is to allow evil to overcome us and to silence us and not say anything. Is that what God calls us to be? Is that what God calls us to do? Absolutely not. If it's said in love, if it's said respectfully, if it's said in a dialogue, boy, that can be like an opening to further conversations. Or it can shut down conversations. It depends on how the person takes it. A third category, I am not overcome by evil, but neither do I overcome evil. I view myself more as a victim of evil. Sometimes the difference between number 2 and number 3 can be a little not as clear, but I hope I can explain it to you. In number 3, I know that vengeance is not to be in my hands. In number 2, I wish vengeance could be in my hands. I just don't have it. In number 3, I know that vengeance should not be in my own hands. But I'm not doing what God called me to do. I am not answering with the good. In fact, I'm sitting back, beginning to question God's timing, and I doubt whether God really has my back. You ever read Psalm 73? This is Psalm 73, where he says, it seems like in vain I've kept my hands pure. In vain I've served the Lord. It seems like the wicked out there is getting away with everything. The wicked is putting it on me. And the psalmist admits, he comes to the place, he said, I had almost slipped. I almost gave it all up. Because I wasn't sure if God had my back. But then I went into the house of the Lord. I went and I got some counsel. I went into God's presence. By the way, if you're going to read Psalm 73, you also need to flip those numbers and look up Psalm 37. They deal with the same topic from a little different angle. You see, in number 3, and by the way, this is where some Christians stay. I feel like if I don't do something wrong against the person, that's enough. If I don't take my own vengeance and I just sit back, that's enough. I take that passive stance, and the Bible says it's not enough. You and I, at that point, have been overcome by evil, not in the sense that we've taken our own vengeance, but we've allowed it to send us into a passive mode where we just sit back. And by the way, when we're sitting back, we're kind of saying, hey God, zap him please. Right? Zap him please. Kind of like a Jonah, right? Sitting on the side of the hill. He had done his job, but now he's waiting. Please, Lord, I'm sitting here. I'm sitting here in this shade, and I can't wait to see them fry. And then Jonah's own attitude starts simmering, right? And he realizes the merciful God who saved him from the whale is the merciful God who's going to save this city from total destruction. It is not for us to believe that we are at the mercy of evil. It is for us to believe that we are in the hand of God. Too many Christians today are backing off, hiding, pulling up the gangplank. Excuse me, not the gangplank. What is it, the castle, the thing? Pulling up the drawbridge and going into hiding. And we think that that's okay, because we're not responding to evil. No, it's not okay. God calls us to overcome evil, not by mounting a greater evil, but by mounting what? Good. I overcome evil with good. When I put the matter into God's hands, and He directs me to do the very opposite of what normally would happen. Look at verse 12, please. I want you to notice I'm sorry, not verse 12. In Romans 12, I want you to notice all these verses that have commands that are not going to allow us to sit still. They are going to send us to do good. Notice verse 14. Bless those who persecute you. Bless and do not curse them. I'm not allowed to just sit there and have all the curses running through my head towards that person. I mean, that would be good, right? I don't open my mouth. No, this sends me to do what? To bless them. Drop down to verse 17. Repay no one evil for evil, but give thought to do what is honorable in the sight of all. Again, I want to ask you a question. How much wiggle room is in the two words, no one? Repay how many people? What if they're your family members, right? Family members can be the most obnoxious, right? So I can at least repay family members, right? Or they're not family members, because your family, you got to take care of them, but they're not family members. There's somebody at work. So I can repay those people, right? Because, I don't have to live with them. How much wiggle room is in this word? Repay no one. And then I want you to notice what it says, but give thought to do what is honorable in the sight of all. Do you know what he's saying here? He's saying you and I, when we're considering the things that could come against us, we need to have a game plan. When people do things wrong to you, don't go with what initially comes to your mind and initially comes to your mouth, because that's usually what? Wrong. He says, when you know that you're going to somebody's house, when you know you're going to a situation where people are going to treat you badly, you need to be thinking about that ahead of time, and you need to determine in your heart that you're going to do what is right. And you're going to repay good for evil. You're going to not curse at them, but you're going to repay them with blessing. Notice verse 20. Again, he tells us that it's not enough to sit back and do nothing. He says, to the contrary, if your enemy is hungry, applaud. You're getting yours. So glad I can be here and see you starving yourself to death. Why don't you eat the money you stole from me? He says, if your enemy is hungry, what? What? If your enemy is thirsty, what? Wow. Man. For by so doing, you will keep burning coals. Oh, good. At last he gets something he deserves. That's not what that's saying. What that's saying is, what you're hoping is that the shame that is coming to him will cause him to repent. Jesus says, you have heard it said, love your friends and hate your enemies. But I say to you what? Love your enemies. Pray for your enemies. Do good to those who curse you. Turn back to Matthew chapter 5. This wasn't just Paul's message. He's putting in there Jesus' message. Matthew chapter 5, the Sermon on the Mount. Verse 10, blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when others revile you and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely on my account. Happy are you. He says, I want to save your attitudes. You see, God doesn't just want to change our actions. He wants to change our attitudes towards those who treat us wrongly. He says, consider yourself blessed, happy, rejoice, and be glad. Be exceeding glad is what it says. For great is your reward in heaven, for so persecuted the prophets who were before you. You see, you not only join Jesus, but you join a long list of those who have done what is right, paid the price of what is wrong, and have understood that their reward comes from God. Go back and read Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel. Read some of those. Read how they were treated. Sometimes it discouraged them, but it didn't stop them from serving God. Turn to 1 Peter chapter 4. God, if you would just let me sit back and see, right? Just let me sit back and quietly hate them. Let me sit back and play it out in my mind what I could do to them. You know what God says? No. In fact, Jesus tells us to do it in our mind. That same Sermon on the Mount is what? He considers it the actions of our heart. 1 Peter chapter 4. Notice what he says here, verse 12. Beloved, do not be surprised at the fiery trials that come on you to test you as though something strange were happening to you. But rejoice insofar as you share Christ's sufferings, that you may also rejoice and be glad when his glory is revealed. If you are insulted for the name of Christ, you are blessed, because the Spirit of glory and of God rests on you. Don't consider it something to be avoided. Consider it something that verifies the fact that Jesus Christ indeed is part of your life, because you are sharing in his sufferings. There is only one way that I'm going to be able to do this, and it's for Jesus to live in my heart and for his character to be seen in these times when it is most crucial, because I am being treated just as Jesus was treated. When he was reviled, he did not revile again. You know, when we look at Jesus, even as he's dying, right? Even as he's going to the cross, they're in the garden, and this soldier comes, and one of the disciples pulls out his sword and he whacks the guy's ear off. And Jesus doesn't stand there and say, "See, you didn't listen to me, so I had him whack your ear off," right? Wouldn't that have been okay? Wouldn't it have even been okay to leave the ear laying on the ground? Wouldn't that have been okay? Oh, get the guy to a hospital quick. You know, as you're marching me back, somebody take him to the emergency room. No, what does Jesus do? He heals the ear of the high priest's servant. And they still arrest him. As Jesus is being arrested, he says, let my followers go. Take me, but let these go. He didn't even have to say it twice. They were already gone because they had deserted him. And yet he loved them, and he calls Peter back. Even on the cross, what's Jesus say? Father, take note of everybody who here, make sure that they get theirs. Right? No, what's he say? Write down all those names. And he says, Father, what? Forgive them. The only way that I'm going to be able to respond is that Jesus lives in my life and heart, and his character shines through in these times that his character was seen and now must be seen in me, who I am his follower. Notice what it says in 1 Peter chapter 3. Verse 9, and then we're going to drop down to verse 14. Do not repay evil for evil or reviling for reviling, but on the contrary, bless. For to this you were called, that you may obtain a blessing. And then if you drop down to verse 14, he tells us how in the world that's going to be possible. Even if you should suffer for righteousness' sake, you will be blessed. Have no fear of them, nor be troubled. But in your hearts honor Christ the Lord as holy, always being prepared to make a defense to anyone who asks you for the reason for the hope that you have within him. The only way that I'm going to be able to respond in these situations is because Jesus is ruling on my heart. Not fear of man, not desiring to get revenge, not fearing any of those things, not being interested in them, but being interested that Jesus is seen to be who he is. And who is Jesus? The one who, when he was reviled, did not revile back. When he was denounced, loved. When he was put on a cross, forgave. The greatest evil was taken on by the greatest good. The only good one. That's what the Bible tells us, right? The only perfect one. The greatest evil itself was overcome. When you and I respond with evil, we join the wrong side. You understand that? This is not just a slip-up. This is not just a momentary lapse. When you and I respond with evil, we join the wrong side. Because that battle line was drawn and that battle was won by Jesus. We're going to come back to this passage and talk about it a little more next week. But right now, we remember how exactly that was accomplished.